So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our external stakeholders session. We're going to give a minute for everybody that has registered is connected, and then we will get started. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we can get started. So welcome again to our first external stakeholder session of this year. And we're really very pleased to have, as always, a wonderful group of panelists and speakers that are going to be joining us, sharing on several topics that we always consider that are adding a lot of value to our daily work as responsible for regulatory policies and the regulatory processes that ensure safe and quality medical devices available in Latin America, but of course worldwide. So thank you very much for sharing us, joining us today. And Leticia, can we go to the next slide, please? So real quick housekeeping messages. As always, you know, we provide simultaneous interpretation to English, Portuguese, and Spanish. May all have the opportunity to take the best possible outputs of these sessions. So you can just go to the globe icon at the bottom of your screens in the Zoom platform, so you can access whatever of the three options on languages you would like to listen the presentations today in. Again, as always, this session is being recorded, and all the recordings and materials are going to be made available through the coalition website in the upcoming days. And for Q&A, please, again, as we customarily do, post your questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom platform that is also located at the bottom menu in your screen, so we may post the questions to our speakers. So now real quick, we can go to check the agenda that we have for today. So we are getting started with Marie Valentin from the World Health Organization. She's going to be sharing with us some training materials that they have developed in order to promote and provide tools for us to better understand and apply good reliance practices. Marie is a technical office at the Regulatory Convergence and Networks team, also Regulatory and Safety Unit, and the Regulation and Pre-Qualification Department at the World Health Organization. And we're really very pleased, and we're very thankful for the WHO continuous support, and especially from Marie. And then from there, we will go to some practical examples and some sharing in regards on how ANVISA and the Ministry of Health are implementing both good regulatory practices from the reliance perspective and also from the good regulatory practices implementation directly. Then we will learn from the GMTA through Janet Tronso on the position paper that GMTA has developed in regards of reliance. And last but not least, we will learn from Patty Wu from CMI on the latest initiative, America's Rise for Health. What are the elements, the statements, how the initiative looks like, and how does that has to do with our efforts in regards of advancing regulatory convergence. So without further ado, Marie, the floor is yours, and thank you very much again for joining us today.
Good morning to you all. Thank you to the organizer. First of all, so you can see my slides okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. So good morning to you all, and thank you very much for the organizer to invite us and to share some of the WHO work in terms of reliance. We are very happy, and I think it's an exciting webinar, so we are very happy to participate. So my name is Marie Valentin, and I'm a technical officer in the team Regulatory Convergence and Networks at WHO headquarters in Geneva. And we will be discussing how we can use reliance to work towards more efficiency for the global regulatory oversight of products. So just the outline of the presentation, we will look a bit at the principle of reliance. I will introduce the WHO e-learning course that has been released recently, and also to give you some sources of additional information. So if we look at the picture today in terms of maturity level of the regulatory systems, WHO serves 194 member states, and we can see that as of today, 70%, so 137 countries, still have a relatively weak regulatory system. So they are still at a level of maturity 1 or 2, which is not the stable or functioning regulatory system that we would like to see, maturity level 3. So we see that there is a lot of work in terms of building capacity of member states. So the WHO regulatory system strengthening program is twofold. One is to build regulatory capacity in member states consistent with the good regulatory practices that were issued in March 2021, but also to promote regulatory cooperation, collaboration, work sharing, and reliance. Because we can see that although the picture is getting better in terms of many countries building up their capacity, it will take a long time for all or the majority of the countries to have a stable regulatory system. So we have to find ways to facilitate access to quality assured medical products for those countries who have limited regulatory capacity. So one could ask, before I move to the next one, I should say that this picture is based mainly on medicine. So, and we know that for medical device, the picture is, the landscape is ever more fragmented and even more challenging. So we have to work also very collectively, collaboratively for medical device. So one could ask, are we using the global regulatory resources as best as we can today? And I think collectively we can say there is a margin for improvement. When we look at the work of regulators and industry, we know that there is an increasing in workload in terms of fast evolving science, globalization of supply chains, globalization of clinical trial program, etc. And there is a limited global regulatory resources. So we've got the same amount of work or more work to do with limited resources. So really we should look collectively how we can best use the resources. And when we see certain level of duplication in terms of assessments or inspection, we can see that it's not the best use of resources. So what are the solutions? We have to look at innovative models in terms of work sharing, joint assessments, average pathways, and have strengthened collaboration between regulators. So how can reliance be implemented? We have to remember first that it's a voluntary participation. So we acknowledge that maybe sometimes the legal and regulatory frameworks are not fully harmonized, but it doesn't prevent from using or leveraging the evaluation or the inspection from other sources, from other regulators. It represents a change in mindsets because it's true, it's a different way to work. It might change the way the work has been conducted for many years. However, we have to see it as a very beneficial and efficient way to conduct a regulatory oversight. We should start small. We cannot change the full picture in one day. So we have to start small. We have to learn by doing. So pilots, all the pilot programs are fantastic for that because we see many, many pilot programs across the globe. And it's a very exciting time in terms of testing new models of reliance and strengthened collaboration. Last but not least, we know that harmonization of requirement is a facilitator, but it's not a prerequisite. So again, reliance can be used even if there is no full harmonization in terms of requirements. So what are the main principles of reliance? The aim is to try to reduce duplication when it doesn't bring any additional benefits. It is based on a risk-based approach. So where should I put my resources as a regulator? If a medical product has already been assessed and some manufacturing sites have already been inspected, can I leverage the work of other regulators? Can I free some of my resources to concentrate on product where I'm the only overseeing regulator? So if for product, for example, locally manufactured. And also for using reliance, we need objective and transparent source for the reference authorities. And as you know, the 2023 is a big year because we are moving towards the new reference of WHO listed authorities. So this would replace the old concept of stringent regulatory authorities. The concept of stringent regulatory authorities was linked to the membership of the International Council of Harmonization in October 2015. So it was quite a static concept. And now we're moving to a more transparent, evidence-based ways to inform regulators on which regulatory authorities they can rely upon. And I invite participants to look at the WHO website, where there is a transitional list already of WHO listed authorities, and there will be some announcement later this year in terms of the first WLA announced. We've got many examples for medical device in terms of outreach regulatory pathways, and we see some very good collaboration in different regions in terms of using the evaluation from other authorities. We can see also like a reliance system for a group of countries, for example, for the medical device single audit program. And we can see work sharing in terms of sharing the workload between authorities and deciding which part or which aspect of the assessment each of the authorities can do. Now we'll move to present briefly this Open WHO Good Reliance Practice e-learning course. It's quite a short course, so it's not even 30 minutes, it's 25 minutes, and it's available on Open WHO, so it's open access. So I will invite all the participants to have a look at it, and you can share it widely because it's an open source and it can be shared widely. It was launched in October 2022, and we've got already over 5,000 learners to date. It's available in English, in French, and in Spanish. So it comports several modules. So the first module is to explore the concept and importance of reliance for the regulatory oversight of medical products, and explain why nowadays it's so important to try to work collaboratively. In fact, no regulatory authorities nowadays, even the best resource one, can do the regulatory oversight alone. So all the regulatory authorities from different level of maturities and different level of resources are using reliance. The second module is regarding the 6 main principles of reliance, which are universality, sovereignty. So it's very important to always remind everybody that although authorities may leverage and may use the assessment from others, they remain independent and sovereign in their decision. So they can make their own decision about the product. We promote transparency in terms of how the reliance approaches are used, but also in terms of sharing assessment report and inspection reports, and having, as far as possible, also public information in terms of evidence-based decision-making for medical products. It has to be consistent with the legal basis, the national and regional legal framework. We should have consistency in terms of what output can be expected. So to have consistent approach for consistent type of products, and competency is very important, because reliance shouldn't be seen as a way to reduce the experts, but it's a way to learn, being exposed to assessment from other regulators. So it's a good way to do regulatory capacity building in the different regulatory authorities. The module 3 regards the key concept and general consideration for reliance in terms of how to use the risk-based approach, how to look at reliance for the whole life cycle approach. And we've seen, for example, in the case of facilitating the COVID-19 vaccines access globally, reliance was key in terms of facilitating the in-country authorization, but also for the batch release, to rely on the batch release from the national control laboratories and not to repeat tests when it was not necessary, but also for the post-authorization management. So we should look at reliance approaches for the whole life cycle approach. It also looks at recognition that can be seen as a more formalized way of reliance. One country may decide to rely on the decision of another country, and this can be unilateral or mutual. And we see a lot of mutual recognition agreements in case of inspection, for example. And also it touched upon some example of regional reliance mechanism. The module 4 is dedicated to some example of successful reliance models that are happening right now for the different regulatory functions. So in terms of clinical trials, outreach regulatory pathways, batch release, inspection, and medical devices. The module 5 just presents the potential barriers and enablers for reliance. So we know that there might be some identified barriers in terms of implementing reliance. and some enablers. So I think in the planning of the different model, it's important to acknowledge those and to plan efficiently to try to mitigate those barriers and use the enablers. So to finish, so some of the take-home messages. So we've seen it's essential for all the global regulatory community to make best use of the available regulatory resources globally. And we know that reliance is an efficient tool to try to make best use of these resources. The present is collaborative, but I believe the future will be even more collaborative. And I think in the future, we will see even more work sharing as a key solution and collaborative efforts to try to, for regulators to work together, to share the workload in terms of regulatory approval, but also regulatory oversight and monitoring of products. We have to work collaboratively to change the mindset. We should start small, so we have to, we cannot change everything in one day. We have to look at using pilot programs and testing and really jump in the water and try some innovative approach and try some type of collaboration and work sharing between regulators. We also shouldn't reinvent the wheel, so we should look at existing models and look what has worked well and what can be used forwards. And we should share best practices between regulators, but also between companies. So if we've seen that a model has been successful, I think I will encourage colleagues to publish and to share in conferences the good models that have been tested for reliance and for regulatory oversight. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any question. Thanks a lot.
Marie, thank you very much for sharing with us today. And I don't see any question right now at the Q&A. We will just ask whether the materials were going to be made available, and yes, they are going to be made available through our website. But one of the things that, you know, I'm always interested in asking questions. So how do you see that we as the private sector and several other stakeholders may take the best out of these efforts that WHO is putting in place in regards of developing all of these materials? How can we better support the regulators through these materials and through many other different actions in order to help reliance become a reality and getting to a more, I could say, homogeneous understanding on what reliance is about and how important it is to think of reliance through the whole life cycle of a product? Too many things as always, sorry. No
worries, fully understood. So I think one of the aspects is really to use some of the guidance that's already there. So to use, I mean, the good reliance practice has a lot of interesting points in terms of eye level and how can it be set up. So one of the aspects is to be an advocate and promote for reliance. That will be one point. The second point is that many regulators, because we are all in the learning curve, although the concept of reliance is existing for many years. For example, the certificate of pharmaceutical products was the oldest way of reliance, but we are all in a learning curve in terms of trying new models. So some regulators, they've been very transparent and they propose some pilots and they propose also some feedback from the industry and from the private sector. And I think it's very important to co-write and co-edit and work together on what could be the procedure and what could be the processes that could work for both sides. And I'm thinking, for example, for post-authorization, we know the workload is massive on both sides. So I think it's very important to have this dialogue. And we know that a lot of regulators have been very open and transparent, and they've actually consulted publicly the users. So I think it's very important to be vocal and to try to give suggestion in terms of how the best model would look like or how the best setting could look like. And the last point really is, as I said, to try to also encourage, and we can see, for example, in the terms of post-authorization changes for medicinal products here, a few big companies have decided to run pilots with a reference authority to try to have a shorter timeline and a better rollout of, for example, a major change in the manufacturing process, to have a more coordinated submission between many countries. So we don't have to be shy, and we don't have to be, so as I said, we should try to jump in the water. So we shouldn't be shy in terms of proposing things to regulators as well, in terms of using, for example, a reference authority and offering to other regulators to be part of pilots or new models or new ways of working.
Sorry, I had my microphone closed. So we have a comment and a question from Craig Opdak. This is a great initiative to emphasize and promote collaboration to improve outcomes. Thank you so much for your presentation, Marie Valentine. And we have a question from Yadira Sandoval. How can we propitiate our health authorities to start a reliance model? Is there any experience that can be shared of this kind of approach?
I think in terms of, I suppose the question is linked to the fact that maybe one authority might not use it that much. To let you know that, for example, on the global benchmarking tool, reliance is a very important aspect. And when we do all the regulatory system strengthening mission, it's one of the aspects that's also promoted to regulators. However, if one regulator is not using it as such or yet, the private sector can also have a discussion or dialogue. So in terms of if they would want, for example, to, I suppose they are doing it in a sense anyway, because, for example, a company could indicate that a post-authorization change has been authorized by a reference authority already, and they can facilitate the reliance by sharing with the authorities this evaluation already, and indicating that it's been already evaluated by a trusted source, and that some efficiency could be taken in terms of using what evaluation has already been done. So I think there is, I think it's very positive if companies also start a dialogue with some of the regulators if they see that there's opportunities for reliance in a specific region or specific country.
Thank you very, very much, Marie. And how do you see, I mean, I think that there's no doubt that reliance is really kind of like the only way to go in the future. I mean, there is no way that regulatory authorities and even the private sector to have sufficient resources as to run every single process over and over again in different countries without really adding a lot of value in regards of providing additional certainty in regards of safety and quality and performance as intended for the devices. However, we still see as a barrier that regulatory frameworks have to be updated in order to properly apply reliance. And we're really very glad to have Anvisa sharing what they are doing in that regard. But how do you see again, that WHO can help, how do we as private sectors can help us to expedite the regulatory frameworks to be updated as to properly apply reliance. And of course, in that regard, by rapidly doing that, I do not mean that those changes are not to be followed following good regulatory practices. But what would you recommend, what your suggestions might be for the regulatory authorities to start their processes in regards, again, of updating their regulatory frameworks as to have reliance as an available, legally based tool for them to operate?
Thanks a lot, Sandra, for the question. So what we always recommend is that you can always accommodate reliance, even if it's not explicitly mentioned in the legal framework or the regulatory framework. The only issue is that we've had cases where it was forbidden, so there was a provision preventing from using outside or like a reference evaluation or inspection. So in that case, we would advise obviously the country to look at their legal framework and to try to optimize. But even if it's not mentioned, there's a provision, especially to reliance. As long as it can be accommodated to the legal framework, we always encourage to use it and to use it as part of the current legal framework. I think a lot of countries are using reliance in terms of, and we've seen it, for example, for the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine, because there was no way first also there was nowhere also for companies to submit to 150 countries. So the WHO was used as a hub with as a relaying information for the quality, safety and efficacy of the vaccines. And I think some of these lessons learned can be very useful in terms of high level of collaboration. Obviously, we cannot apply the same level of stress to the system as much as in terms of emergency. But I think it's very important to see this increasing collaboration between regulators, and we see it happening everywhere. So as trust has been built, I think there will be more and more reliance proposal coming forwards, but also, as I said, for companies also to be innovative and do not hesitate to propose some models, because you can see what challenges you have in which question or which country or which region. So you can also propose and to work with regulators to see what could work and be improved.
Thank you, Marie. And you know, it's interesting. We have a comment here in the Q&A from Roberta Melemasa. She's saying, nowadays, I see each regulators are not intending to get a consensus with others. On the contrary, I see more and more difficult. Any comment in this regard? Is this something that WHO is also perceiving?
Yes, no, I think it's very interesting. Thanks a lot for the comments. We always say, you know, some people would say, oh, we don't want to have only one voice in any case. So, I mean, we have to look at, because it's true, maybe there is a benefit in terms of having some independent scientific review and independent evaluation of the data, and that we can see. So even, for example, the European system that is based on a common network, they always have like a rapporteur and a co-rapporteur, so they always have two independent evaluation, and then they put it together and they can have some additional, because maybe having one voice is not what we're trying to reach. I think it is good for a robust decision-making process and a robust scientific evaluation to have several evaluation. But it's true that in any case, it has happened for many medical products. Sometimes the outcome are based on the same data. It's not the same outcome, and this will remain. I think this will remain in terms of the way regulators look at the data and the guidelines they follow, or even, you know, the way they look at data. Some go back to the raw data, they do their own analysis, etc., etc. So we see some divergency. It is correct. We see some divergency at some point, but we're hoping that you know, in most of the cases, regulators are relatively in agreement for the outcome regarding medical products.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Marie. And just a clarification, it seems that we have Viviana Setola registered as Roberta Mele. So the question was coming from Viviana, not from Roberta. Just a clarification in that regard. So Viviana, thank you very much for letting us know. And now I have a question from Emma Escandon. She's asking whether the World Health Organization has approached some regulators in Latin America. I would assume, and Emma, correct me if I am wrong, in regards of implementation of reliance. And if that is the case, if you could share with us which are the regulatory authorities in Latin America that had been approached by WHO.
Yes, so I think our work is global, so definitely we are reaching out to all the regulatory authorities, and I should highlight here also the work of PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, and they do a lot also on reliance. And you know that in the PAHO region there is the notion of reference regulatory authority. So there is a lot of work being done in reliance. I don't have any specific countries to highlight, but I would refer you to also the work that's done on the PAHO and the PAHO website in terms of reference authority, and in terms of, and they're also on the WHO website on the transitional list for WLA. But also the work on PAHO, that's they've also issued quite a few guidelines on reliance.
Thank you very much. And now, actually coming from Roberta, we have here a question. It's more like a joint question for WHO and the coalition. Could the coalition or WHO host a reliance pilot between countries?
So what
do
we
you see that as a possibility?
we can, so we're always supportive. So usually it's not initiated by WHO, but we are supportive of any pilot, and even from the private industry. We've got, as I said, we've got few pilots for post-authorization changes currently, but we are always here to support. So it wouldn't be automatically initiated by us, but we are, if there is any proposal, we will be very happy to support and to help.
Okay, then I think that we will have to start a conversation, Marie.
Yes.
So as coalition, we can also support, and we're really very glad on the work that we are doing, and we're going to be sharing the invitation that we received also to take part as coalition to this other coalition of the WHO. So I think that this is really great to learn that there are all these opportunities, and I think that just following up on Roberta's comment and question, I think that having these joint efforts between the private sector supported by WHO and PAHO would provide probably a higher level of trust, of confidence in order to start running these pilots. So this is something that we know, of course, requires to get into a procedure or a process and a certain level of structuring authorizations, et cetera, But I think that is something that we could probably think about how we can explore to make it a reality and to have an actual, a true action in order to support the implementation of Reliance. I don't know, what do you think about this?
Yeah, no, exactly. Learning by doing, and that's what we've seen here. I think is the best way to learn and to put in place some model and process that can work.
Wonderful. Well, so I think people is excited about us getting into defining a pilot that we could really make a reality. So we'll start these conversations, and we'll keep everybody aware and learning where do we see that could be like the I would say the low-hanging fruit that we can identify in order to have like early wins in such an initiative. So we will be in touch, and we'll keep the coalition members informed about that. Here we have Lucas Silva mentioning definitely already enrolled in the Good Reliance Practices course at Open WHO. Thank you so much for divulging it, Marie.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for the organizer. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So it seems that we are already done with the questions. So Marie, thank you very much again for your support, and you know you count on us as a partner to help promoting and actually getting the true benefit out of all the effort that you are doing in order to develop capacities to proper utilize and foster reliance as a mechanism to benefit patients globally. So thank you very much again, Marie, and to the whole team at the WHO that always support also our efforts in this capacity building. Thank you so much, Marie.
Fantastic. Many thanks.
Thank you. So now I'm really glad to get us into the next part of our agenda, where we are having Tiago Silva Carvalho, and my apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, Tiago. He's coordinator at the coordination of the Advisory Office on Regulatory Impact Assessment. Tiago is joining us on behalf of Talita Antoni de Sousa Lima, who is the head of the Advisory Office for Regulatory Quality Improvement at Anvisa. Talita is currently on holidays, but she definitely left us in very, very good hands. So Tiago, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Sandra. You pronounce correctly. It's all right. I will do my presentation in Portuguese, so I have to apologize to all the English speaker, because my presentation I cannot make the translation to the English, so the presentation also is made in Portuguese. But I will speak very slowly to take the comprehension for everybody. Well, my presentation. Okay. Vou começar minha apresentação aqui.
I will start my presentation here. I hope that you can see now. As I was saying, my presentation is going to be done in Portuguese. And I apologize for the English speakers because I couldn't translate this for this presentation. I represent here today Anvisa, the accessory of regulatory quality improvement, and I'm the coordinator of assessing analysis of regulatory impact. I would like to present to you how Anvisa is developing the challenges to apply the good reliance practice. It's a path that we are following for some time, but it's a challenge for everyone, for the entire institution. So I would like to thank you for inviting me for this presentation. This is quite important to us. I'm really pleased to be here sharing with you our challenges and our experience in this practice. So we are here. As we have done, as we are trying to apply the good reliance practices in Anvisa, with the measures that we want to improve the quality of regulation of the regulatory agencies. So the practice that we are adopting since 2008, we were pioneers of this topic in Brazil. When we added the guide for good reliance practice in 2008, and we tried to adopt and encourage the improvement of regulatory actions because we understood the quantity of benefits that the application of these tools, of this methodology is providing regarding economic growth, improve quality of products, encouragement of entrepreneurship. So we have the quality of regulation that's done by the agency, and we are adopting this good reliance practice. It's being adopted in Anvisa for at least 15 years, but in the years in Brazil, when we had new guidelines for good reliance practice, especially for the regulatory agencies. In 2019, we had the general law for the agencies that established some good practice for regulations for the agencies as a whole, to have public consultation, and other laws and decrees are being added for the federal government since that. So we had an effort saying how we applied and we implemented this good reliance practice from this general law, a national law. We had an internal standard. So we had the good practice and we had this regulation from Anvisa. So we had this one for 2021 and established the guidelines to improve the quality. And then we had a service orientation, number 96 from 2021, to establish the flow, to elaborate and deliberate the regulatory instruments, to establish the step-by-step as this should be done, following the guidelines for the good reliance practice. These internal norms, they follow some guidelines that we establish as a guide to improve the regulatory quality for Anvisa. So our regulation should be based on the sanitation risk, a regulation based on evidence, always encourage a regulatory predictability, coherency, convergency, to have a regulatory environment that's favorable to social and economical development, debureaucratize, to be faster, to get more admin process that can become simple, transparency and strength of social participation, continuous improvement of these results. So these are the guidelines that we have in Anvisa since we added these actions that I showed you and the service orientation. I'd like to highlight here 3 of these guidelines. That is the transparency, predictability, and regulation based on evidence, 3 guidelines that will be present in this presentation that are quite important for the development of Anvisa rules.
essa normatização interna, nós
Based on
construímos
this internal standardization, we define a regulatory cycle for the agency inspired on the best regulatory practices, starting with the regulatory planning, with the main tool being the building of a regulatory agenda, the construction of the intervention. So we use the regulatory impact analysis and public consultation, then the evaluation of the result of these standards based on monitoring and the regulatory results assessment, and the regulatory stock management. So it is the organizing and reviewing these standards. So this cycle is used to identify points of failure or opportunities of improvement that Anvisa starts a new cycle. So we conclude a regulatory cycle, and that has helped us acting at Anvisa. Talking a little bit about each of these steps, starting with the regulatory planning, with a highlight to the regulatory agenda. The agenda of Anvisa is very well organized for a decade, and so we are in the cycle of 22, and the agenda is concluding this year to start a new cycle next year. And the main goal of this agenda is to promote transparency, predictability, and efficiency of the regulatory actions. And so we provide to the society our intention to regulate over the next 3 years. And it's an important tool for the planning, the active planning of all the standards. So the stakeholders can see in the agenda what points Anvisa is intending to act in the next years. And we are going through moments of updating this agenda every year. So we have a number of topics that is expected to be considered in the agenda, but it's not a fixed list. It changes over the years. Some topics are added, some are removed in the annual update, and then we have the annual planning. So the areas of Anvisa that work within their scopes, they will update the information about how they are going to build the standards over the year. So we start from an update in December 22, and now the planning of March 2023 very recently. And so we're going to have a new update until the end of this year. And that's the moment that we have the opportunity for stakeholders to show the points there may be a need of action in terms of standards from Anvisa. And so we build the agenda based on the current projects and processes, some that are out of the agenda, and some external consultation contributions, as we intend to go further in a new consultation in the next semester. And from these contributions we receive, they can motivate the inclusion of topics to this agenda, so they can go through the regulatory process. So in our agenda, the last update that happened at the end of last year, we had 158 projects in our regulatory agenda of Anvisa. It's a robust number, it's an impressive number of projects, 158 different topics that are going through standardization in the next 3 years. So 10 projects were excluded and 11 were included in the annual update. And so we have 159 for our regulatory agenda. And it is a continuous review that happens to all these topics to see the ones that are still relevant. So here, the distribution of this agenda, 16 macro topics to show the most voluminous ones. For medication, we have 42 projects, 24 for transversal topics, 19 for health products, 12 for food, 12 for services, health services. So this is the whole scope that we have inside Anvisa. Here, with the QR code, you can access all the information about the regulatory agenda that we have. And when I make this presentation available for you, you can also have access to all that information. Still considering regulatory planning, in our agenda, we allow the areas to build a timeline on how they're going to act on each of the topics. That planning is made available for the society in our portal to ensure the transparency and the predictability of our regulatory agenda. So with the planning that we had in March 2023, we identified 207 regulatory proposals, an impressive number, and each of these projects. So now, as I mentioned, we have 159 projects that can motivate more than one standard. So we have 168 standard acts, 38 guidelines, and one that is undefined. So 207 regulatory proposals, 34% of them were not started yet, and 38% of them are in the regulatory impact analysis phase. So we may be the agency with a higher volume of processes in RIA. We have identified, considering the aspect of the transparency of information, we have made available this dashboard in our portal. So everyone can really see all that information about how we work. Here you again have the QR code on the screen, so you can access all that information. And on the portal, you have information as a dashboard, like an overview, as well as specific actions in all those topics. So we have information, for example, about modernization of the regulatory framework for procedure flows for new ingredients, and how we are acting inside Anvisa. So, for example, when we have the public consultation, and it's expected, for example, for the third quarter of 2022, and it's going to be concluded in 2023. So for each topic, you can have access to how the agency is acting, and you will be surprised with, I'm sorry, we will not be surprised with anything outside this agenda. We want to bring this visibility and this transparency of everything we are doing. Now, going to the second point of our regulatory cycle, which is building this intervention, it is about developing the regulatory instruments. I will go back to the regulatory part to talk a little bit more about how all this works, but our standardization action, our good regulatory practices that is used in Anvisa for years, is the public consultation for the minimal period of 45 days for all of our standard acts. So this duration can be adjusted, but we have that amount of time for the society to receive that information, provide their contributions. So in situations of urgency and the situations that the public consultation is considered unproductive, we don't have the public consultation, but in general, we do that for the society. But before that, we have the regulatory impact analysis, which is, there is a decree that makes it mandatory for the executive and federal sphere of Brazil. So we need the RAI to see all the acts of this standard. So Anvisa started using it. And it has done that even before it became mandatory. So this RAI can be dismissed in some situations, like a situation of urgency, as we had with COVID-19. So the number of standards that Anvisa issued was not did not have the mandatory RAI, but we also have some other situations like low impact situations, some standards that are considered obsolete, and some convergency with international standards, and to reduce regulatory costs, and to review some standards that are considered out of date. So, considering these situations, anything outside of it, we have the requirement for an RAI. So this shows us that how we use the regulatory impact analysis. We identify and analyze the regulatory problem, then we identify and analyze the regulatory alternatives, and then we compare the regulatory alternatives. Of course, all of that is used based on evidence, and we all will consult the stakeholders. So the RAI is something not to justify a standard. So you propose one and then you have an RAI to justify it. But knowing Anvisa, we think of a regulatory problem, and based on the thinking that RAI starts us having, we consider and see if the standard will be created or not. And we have the stakeholders participating in all the process. So we always try to create the opportunity for stakeholders to really have evidence and information so we can act. The RAI report has all of those aspects. I'm not going to mention all of that because I'm going through my time here, but we need to bring inside an RIR, the regulatory impact report brings all of that. And so how can we consult the agents? Because we can raise evidence and also to inform to the society and involve all the affected parties. We want to take a commitment. We don't want regulation that is impositive. We want them to be participative, and we want to legitimate our decisions, bring accountability, provide transparency to the process, and reinforce the democratic action of Anvisa. So we developed, considering the way we apply our good regulatory practice, we have our menu of options where different areas of Anvisa can adopt different ways of consulting the stakeholders, not only public consultation. Public consultation is one of the possibilities, but we also, I'm not going to mention all of them, but we can also have an idea. For example, if an area needs to consult a specific group of agents, we can have a targeted consultation or a sectorial conversation. So these reports can consider the technical rationale before submitting it for decision making. So we have even the subsidy public consultation, so the society can read a preliminary expedient and participate with the contributions that can change our point of view, which is very normal and desirable if we are adopting a path that would not be the most efficient one. So we have some examples of public participation. So this is for the food nutritional labeling, and we had a considerable number of contributions, over 30,000 contributions received, over 6,000 participants, a great volume of documents, and this participation that we had in this regulatory process was very rich and was very important for the decision that Anvisa made. So some more recent cases. We had some RAI for the smoking electronic devices with 1,567 participation. And for cannabis, for medicinal purposes, 989 participations. So the regulatory participation of Anvisa calls for this social participation and has received a lot of contributions. Here are some success cases of our IAR, some regulatory impact reports, and you can access it through the QR code. After the event, we are going to receive my presentation as well. And we have an effort at Anvisa to prepare our technical team to be able to produce the RAIs, and we have the production of reference materials, guidelines, templates, and our main action was with this journey through tools of design thinking and workshops to encourage or boost the participation of the agents in Anvisa. So we developed a kit of design thinking for AR, and there is some agencies in the Brazilian government can have access as well, so you can do that as well. And we go to the regulatory results, assessment and monitoring, and there we have, first off, the monitoring to identify during the regulatory cycle possible failures this standard may have and if it reaches its objectives. In some cases, we are going to have the regulatory results of assessment. So understand if that standard really meets the demands it was built to meet. And so I'm not going to go through all the points here, but the main purpose of the regulatory result assessment is to provide the base to support the decision-making of Anvisa decision makers in terms of maintaining or revoking some standards. So in Anvisa, we have situations where the RRA is mandatory, and in some cases it is elective, it's optional, and situations in which the RRA is dismissed in case of the temporary standards or exceptional standards. And in Anvisa, we have already settled an agenda of RRA, and Anvisa also asks, provides that to society so we can have predictability and transparency of our standards. Our agenda has cases of mandatory RRAs. These ones are not going to be needed in case of urgency. And so we have in situations of, for example, COVID-19, some situations that we are going to need to go past that, and some elective cases. So the areas would like us to revisit that standard. We also have a dashboard for monitoring of our RRAs and a QR code here if you want to access it. And the intention is to make our regulatory action more transparent so the society can keep up with that. And going to the next part of the presentation, the regulatory inventory assessment management coming from this decree 10/139 from 2019. And it's a huge challenge for many agencies, and Anvisa was able to execute this decree very efficiently.
So we planned this normative review, a lot of steps that throughout each period, we reviewed some topics. Until May of 2021, we would review the standards for laboratories, tobacco systems. So it's segmented through time, so we could make this review. And we finished this in the end of the last year. So in the end of this process, we checked 1,932 normative acts. And these consolidations, this review, took to a situation that we have now, 929 current acts in the end of this process. So we assessed 1,915, 853 were revoked, and 339 were consolidated. It was a huge volume of work that was done, and we reduced this regulatory stock. So we reduced in half our regulatory stock.
Essa redução no estoque regulatório.
So we had this reduction in the regulatory stock, and we made available in our website a spreadsheet of comparison as they were before the review process and how they were in the end of the process. So if you want to identify or get to know our work, we have the QR code here, and we are reviewing and doing the consolidation this decree. So we want to keep this prediction of review and consolidate our normative act. So this Article 19, it predicts that into the second year of each term, each body will review and consolidate this for the regulatory stock. So we adopt this practice as a process, a working process in Anvisa, and we are doing these activities so we can have a small regulatory stock and it can be efficient. I know that we have a short period of time, so I think that I'm over time during my presentation. This is what I want to tell you today, our efforts from Anvisa to promote the good reliance practice. And I'll make this presentation available with the QR codes, with the links. So if you want to know, you can have access with the idea of showing transparency of how we work and the predictability of we are predicting to work throughout the next years. So thank you again for inviting me, for the opportunity to be here talking to you. And I'm here if you have questions.
Tiago, really, thank you very much. And I really want to start before getting into the questions that we have already posted by congratulating Anvisa. I think that what you are doing is really, really a model for many regulators in the region to follow. I think that one of the areas that you highlighted during your presentation has to do with transparency. And I'd appreciate if some of our attendees might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there's no regulator with such a strong website in regards of providing visibility on everything that is happening in Anvisa, not only related to product reviews and approvals and that, but also in the regulatory process. And it is really a wonderful model on how good regulatory practices can really be implemented and how you are, I would say, enjoying the benefits coming out of proper implementation of good regulatory practices. But I could say that even more important, how patients are actually being benefited out of that, because that certainly allows for way much more efficient and effective processes to make products available to patients in the country. So really congratulations on all the efforts that you are doing in this regard. And I have a couple of questions on my own, but I will get started with some of the ones that are already posted in the Q&A. So we have here a few anonymous attendees. One of them is asking, how do you operationalize the integration of the feedback that is provided by so many contributors when it comes the time to make decisions in order to build the regulations that are in question. It's a lot of information that you're gathering. How are you really able to manage all that and integrate that and turn it into and including that for the piece of regulation that is being reviewed?
Trabalho realmente bastante.
It's a work that has a huge volume. All of us, as you have mentioned, Sandra, and I thank you for making compliments to us regarding our website, because it's something that belongs to Anvisa to be part of this transparency. But when we become more transparent and we encourage the participation, we also have a problem, a good problem, of course. That's a challenge. We receive a lot of information. So our stakeholders are really engaged and they are always monitoring because they are used of getting this information of what we are doing, our agenda, and they act this. We have this social participation. As you saw, I got 3 examples that had a huge volume of contribution, but I believe that we have a volume that's bigger than other agencies regarding the federal government in Brazil. So it's a big challenge how to work with so many information. And the deadline, because we have a deadline to finish this, the society wants to know about that, but we have 2,000 contributions to work with. Sometimes our work done by each area, so we can build this. We had some experiences in the last years of using softwares to analyze data, to add texts of contribution. So we use this regulatory intelligence to use this to add contributions in big volumes, in the ones that we have a bigger volume and that are more relevant. So we try to add all these contributions into segments. So we encourage the areas to try to answer the contributions individually. So they add this to big groups, and then they can analyze this, consolidate this, and get the information to their reports. But it's a big work, and we need to have the commitment of the Anvisa departments to spend some time identifying this content with some background regarding informatics, so we can add this content, but especially the commitment of the areas of receiving these contributions and spend their time in assessing these technical, scientific evidences or collaborations of people's daily routine regarding the regulatory practice. So this is a challenge. I'd like to have a tool that we could click on a button and we have the result, but it's a lot of work for the technical areas of Anvisa.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And yes, we know this is really a huge challenge. And whenever we are in this type of sessions and building capacity among the private sector, we always encourage them, and we encourage ourselves to make sure that our contributions, whenever there is an open public consultation, are really science-based, are really solid, are based on international standards and references, because that is I would say the way that we are obliged to provide our contributions. We need to make sure that whatever we are going to be providing as input is strong enough as to help the regulators to come up with the best possible piece of regulation and to make it easier for convergence to actually happen. If we propose something that is not aligned with international standards or references, we're not helping our regulators to comply with their obligations in regards of good regulatory practices, but we are also helping them to not make the best possible use of their resources while trying to come up with an answer on why this proposal cannot be accepted. So we're always encouraging all our members to come up with science-based, solid, evidence-based comments while contributing to these open public consultations. Thank you really very much for your response. And we have here some other questions. Another one is, given that the World Trade Organization members are given 60 days to comment on draft technical regulations, is it true that Anvisa will consider comments received on draft regulations that Brazil notifies to the WTO consistent with the WTO TBT agreement?
Se eu entendi bem, a gente está tratando de prazo da Organização Mundial de
If we
Comércio.
understood, we are working with the WTO to receive the contributions. I think the regulation from Anvisa that are related of the standards of WTO, as I've mentioned, it has the deadline for 45 days, but can be adjusted for some specific cases when we have a necessity of shorter period of time or a longer period of time. So we would encourage to have a bigger deadline for 60 days or even more. And we have situations in Anvisa that the deadline to receive contributions, we can postpone that. We establish some date, but regarding the volume of contributions or things that the agents received that they believe that they need a greater deadline. So we have this discussion on the board so we can have an increase in the period of time for this deadline. So I don't know if Anvisa uses a different period of time or WTO uses a different period of time that needs to be adjusted. We should consider this information regarding the deadline. Because the idea is to have bigger participation to receive the greatest amount of contributions in the process. So this adjustment of deadline can be used.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I have here a question in Spanish, so it is going to take me a little while to have it translated into English. So it states, when it is related to matters that involve different authorities or even different sectors that are not necessarily health, but probably commerce, agriculture, etc., how do you guarantee that all stakeholders are properly represented in the output of these interventions? And what is the mechanism to coordinate among authorities on this activity? How do you manage to ensure that any of the actors could be deleted from influencing the decision-making process?
Bom, no caso dos processos
In
regulatórios,
the case of the regulatory process, when we have the regulatory impact, one of the steps of our journey, and this is encouraged since the beginning of the process, is to identify the ones that are interested in the topic, the stakeholders. So we have the definition is not how people are going to be affected, but the ones that can be interested on that and can contribute in building this standard. So we start a regulatory process, identifying the ones that can be affected by the regulatory problem. We define this problem. And then when we are considering the alternatives to achieve the regulatory goals, we review this information with the stakeholders that can be involved in the implementation of alternatives, of these regulatory alternatives. I'll get an example here. We have a regulatory problem that affects the food industry.
Estamos fazendo a implementação dessa alternativa, nós percebemos que existe um Ministério da Anvisa, Ministério da Agricultura, vamos supor, Ministério da Anvisa, não, desculpa, Ministério do Governo Federal Brasileiro, Ministério da Agricultura, que deve ser envolvido. Então a gente procura.
So we need to involve all of them. So we try to have all the technical areas of Anvisa that are involved in this standard, identify these agents. And with that, we get in the regulatory process to get in touch with this agent so they can participate with Anvisa in building these alternatives. It can be through the social participation in specific moments, to have a guided consultancy, or a different action. We had some situations in the agency of bringing external stakeholders, some workshops with the Anvisa team so they can contribute. So trying to summarize the answer, so we have a big effort. We encourage the technical areas from Anvisa to identify everyone that can be affected.
Alguém fique de fora desse mapeamento.
So we don't leave anyone out of this mapping. So after this mapping, we use tools so we can achieve the stakeholders to get technical evidence, scientific evidence, or some guidelines to build the regulatory alternatives that can be efficient and that we can have not only for Anvisa, but everyone that can be part that to have a successful regulation.
Thank you very much. Here we have a couple of questions. It seems that you're considering that less regulation is better. Based on what you have already shared in regards of the reduction on regulations, is there like a quantitative indicator on the positive result of this reduction in regulations?
Deixa eu ver se eu entendi. Se há indicativo
If there's an indicator, what would be the ideal quantity of regulations?
Assim, o processo de revisão e consolidação das normas da
The
Anvisa, como
review
eu acho,
process of Anvisa that I think that happen in anybody, I believe that's a Brazilian reality, but maybe in other countries too. When we look to our regulatory stock, we identify things that are outdated, standards that it doesn't make sense to be there anymore. So this process as a whole will identify different possibilities.
realmente revogar normas e reduzir o estoque regulatório, isso facilita a vida do cidadão. Imagino empresário que precisa
Imagine
atuar
an entrepreneur that needs to work in a topic and then he has different standards that they need to use. So when you have a standard that has 80 articles, but there's a specific article that's what's interested for this person. So it then generates a cost for the society. To have a legal team, technician team, there's a cost for. So we have taxes for people too regarding the price of the service. So to have this information in an easier access, we understand that's a benefit, not only not using regulations. We're not talking about removing standards where they need to be. Saying, oh, this is a difficult standard, so I'm not used. No, it's to verify the regulatory stock and see when we can cut because it's not efficient anymore. There's no reason to have that because it's outdated. And where we can add this information in specific standards. So we have situation in Anvisa, so airports area, they have a standard that impacts the food industry and medicine. So we have different standards inside this body. So when we assess this, and we are more present with the Ministry of Health, so it becomes huge. So when we consolidate the standards in unique articles and cut what's not necessary, this is our main effort to consolidate the standards. So it's not to make it more simple or deregulation, but to make this more intelligent.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we're running out of time. We have one last question, and I have a couple of comments before we close. And here it is. Do you consider the adoption of international standards to regulate any whatever specific process? An example would be the ISO standards.
Aí, desculpa por não responder, porque entra num aspecto técnico muito específico da
So
Anvisa.
I'm not answering because it's a specific technical area from Anvisa. So I cannot talk about this, if this would be possible or not, because I would be getting into a different area. So I apologize that I don't have this answer.
If I may, at the end of the day, ISO standards, these international standards are what are to be used as a base to develop regulations. Instead of developing country unique requirements, we are obliged as member countries of the World Trade Organization to base regulations in international standards. So I understand that this is not your area within Anvisa, but if I may, I mean, that is something and actually we know that, of course, Anvisa does, because you're really following and making sure that you're in compliance with legal obligations before WTO in regards of international standards and adoption.
Há um interesse e intuito da Anvisa como um todo.
There's an interest from Anvisa to adopt international regulations. To have a regulation, a Brazilian regulation related to international standards, it's a good practice, but each one of the standards, of these international standards, we have specific questions to be considered. So we cannot consider this to be a rule that Anvisa can use for all the cases. So I apologize in editing my answer. We consider this a good practice, of course, but when it's possible to use international standards, we're trying to do this. So we have this reflection about problems, national goals, to see where we can establish these standards. So if it's possible, the idea is to adopt them. But we need to check each case, because there are situations that to have a standard, an international standard, maybe is not the best thing for different technical issues in Anvisa's case.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go and read real quick a few comments that we have in the chat box. Elaine Ferraz is saying, Anvisa transparency and open communication is a role model for LATAM region. She also says, thank you very much for the presentation and brilliant work. And Asidco, congratulations to Anvisa, a model to follow in Latin America. And the final one, Anvisa is unique. So really congratulations and thank you very much. And just an invitation and an idea that we are starting to work among ourselves. I mean, I think it would be great if Anvisa could help us put together kind of like a workshop to help other regulators on how to properly implement good regulatory practices, how to efficiently run regulatory impact assessment, as most regulators do not have sufficient resources as to do everything that they would be willing to. So leveraging on the experience that you have already developed, probably that could be a good idea for us to discuss in the future.
Agradeço por todas as palavras em nome da Anvisa.
I thank for the words on behalf of Anvisa, and I'm available. I think this exchange of information experiences is rich for everyone. Anvisa has a lot to learn with other regulators as well. Of course, we don't assume we have everything set. And this experience, this exchange is always very rich, and we are available. And any other comments or doubts that we were not able to solve here, if you want, send us through email or chat. I will have my contact here for you, and please be you can use us anytime you want. Thank you for the opportunity.
Then we will turn the floor into, Colombia, that is going to be sharing through a pre-recorded message from Marta Liébano from the legal department at the Ministry of Health in Colombia in regards to the implementation of the process into the development of the process to properly implement good regulatory practices within the ministry. So if you could help us running the video, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Hello, good
Mi nombre
afternoon.
es Marta
My
Liébano.
name is Marta
Soy la
Liébano.
coordinadora de asuntos
I am the
reglamentarios del Ministerio de
coordinator of
Salud
regulatory
y
matters
estoy
of
muy
the Ministry of
complacida
Health
de
in Colombia.
poderlos
It is a
acompañar
great
en esta
pleasure for me
jornada
to join us
para
today,
contarles, me han
even if it's only
invitado
through
para
recording, to
contarles
tell
el
you a little bit about
procedimiento que nosotros
the
desde Colombia hemos
procedure that we are
adelantado,
following from
particularmente
Colombia,
desde el Ministerio de Salud, para la
from the Ministry of Health
expedición de actos
particularly, for
administrativos y
the
su
issuance
modificación.
of managerial
Esto en el marco
procedures and the
del
possible
proceso de
changes
convergencia
under
regulatoria
the
auspiciado
framework
por
of
USAID
regulatory
y en
convergence,
el cual contamos
and through
con,
which we
como
have,
país y como
as a
entidad,
country,
con el
as well as an
liderazgo y la
entity, we
participación de
follow
Susan
the
Suárez,
leadership of
que nos
Susan
acompañó
Suárez,
durante todo el
who
proceso,
accompanied us
lo
all throughout the
lideró, nos
process.
jalonó para que
She
llegáramos a
was
este
a wonderful
resultado que hoy nos
leader for
tiene
us to
tan
achieve the
contentos,
result that we
tan orgullosos
obtained,
y que es un
which
poco
has
lo que
made
les
us
quiero
feel so
compartir ahora.
pleased, and so proud, and this is what I
Lamentablemente
would
no
like
los
to
pude
explain.
acompañar como hubiera
Unfortunately, I
querido
was not able
y
to
tener
attend in person.
una participación mucho más cercana con
I wish I
ustedes,
could have been there
pero
to
Susan se
answer questions
encuentra
directly,
allí
but Susan is
y
around.
va a responder
And
a las preguntas que
in
puedan
case you
surgir
have any
después de esta
questions, you
charla.
could address
Pero si
them
por
to her
alguna
directly after
circunstancia
the
Susan
presentation. But if
no
still
la pudiera
Susan is
contestar,
not able to
me las
answer
van a
all of your
hacer,
questions,
ella me las va a hacer
please,
llegar para que las
she is
podamos
going to
responder
send them to me
oportunamente.
so that we can
Con
provide an
eso,
answer to them.
entonces paso a
Having
contarles
said
en
this,
qué
let me start
estábamos
by telling you
involucrados
about the
durante el
project
último
we have
año
been
largo
involved during the last
en este
long
proceso,
year
y
in
fue la
this
construcción
process. And it
de
was
un
around the creation,
procedimiento
the
para la
construction of
expedición
a
o
procedure
modificación
for
de los actos
issuing or
administrativos.
changing managerial
Eso
acts
que
or
parece
laws or
bastante
regulations,
lógico
something that
y que uno
seems
se pregunta, oiga,
pretty
¿cómo es que ustedes no
straightforward.
tenían un procedimiento para
You might
expedirlo?
ask
Pues
yourself,
no
why did
teníamos.
you
Así
create one?
que,
Didn't you have one before? We
siguiente,
didn't. So next slide.
un día nos pusimos a
So
preguntarnos
that's why we
qué era lo que
started asking
teníamos, qué
ourselves,
problemas
what
habíamos
do we need?
identificado
What are the
y
problems that we
logramos
have
ver que
identified?
teníamos
And through
todas
that, we
estas
were able
normas
to
que ustedes
see
están
that we
viendo
have many
ahí
regulations,
y muchas
as
más,
many standards as the
pero
ones you see
todas
on the screen,
estaban
and many more,
inconexas.
but all of them were
Cada
not
una
connected. They were
exigía
silos.
una
Each
cosa, un
standard would
tiempo,
require
un
something,
requisito,
a time, a requirement, an
unas
input,
etapas que cumplir,
different
pero
stages, and they were
ni
different from one
siquiera los
another.
más expertos podían
Not
tener
even the
acceso a
top
toda esa
experts
información
knew
de una
everything
forma
there was
unificada.
to be known
De
in
manera
a
que,
unified
como
way.
les decía,
That is
con el
why,
auspicio de USAID,
with the help of
gracias,
Said,
lo que empezamos es
thank
a
you so
ver
much for that, we
qué
started
pasaba, cómo podíamos
seeing
hacer para mejorar
what is it that
esas
we could do
dificultades.
to
Lo que
improve
encontramos haciendo el
those
análisis
difficulties.
es que
So after
teníamos
having
una
done
cantidad de
analysis, we
normas que estaban
realized that we had an enormous
desactualizadas
amount of standards
porque
that
había
were not
resultado muy difícil
updated
hacer
because it had been
su
very
actualización
difficult
por el trámite que
to
eso requería.
have them current
Teníamos
because
una
of the
complejidad de trámites,
the
normas aquí,
complexity
normas
of the
allá, que
procedures.
siguen
You have to
estando,
comply
pero
with
que
a
con el
standard here,
instrumento
another
que
one
nos
there.
hemos
I mean, they
inventado,
still remain,
pues está
but thanks to
recogido
this
ahí el
new
paso a
instrument,
paso
at
y
least
vamos solo
there
a
is a
tener que
step
consultarlo y
by
saber
step
qué es lo que hay que
approach.
hacer.
So people can have
Tenemos
a
también
roadmap of
identificado que
what to
habían
do.
unas
We
áreas
have also
técnicas,
identified
unos
that there were some
operarios
technical
técnicos
areas, some
que
technical
saben
operations,
a
which
profundidad
were
los temas que les involucra, pero que no
very
conocen
deep in
cómo se
complexity,
hace la
and
expedición
sometimes
de
it
un
was
acto
difficult for
administrativo
people to understand
y que
how
a
the
veces el
standards were created
acompañamiento del
or the
operador
regulatory
jurídico
actions, and
no
that's
es
why having
permanente
a
o no está
legal
sino hasta el final
consultancy
del procedimiento, lo que hacía
sometimes
que
it's difficult
fuera
to keep
necesario
it up all
muchas veces
throughout the process. That
devolverse
is why
en el
people
a
had to go
mejorar
back
el
to
trabajo que se hubiera
trying to
adelantado
figure
ya.
out the
Por
work
último,
that had
había
already
un
been done and rework
desconocimiento,
it. And there was also
obviamente
a
por
lot
todo
of
eso, y un desconocimiento
lack
de
of
las etapas
clarity
y de los
of the
procedimientos que se
different
deben llevar a
stages or
cabo para la
procedures that had to
expedición
be
de un acto
followed
administrativo.
to
Con esos
obtain
antecedentes, ¿qué fue
one
lo que
of those
hicimos?
standards
Decir,
or
bueno, si tenemos
administrative
un
acts
problema,
or
necesitamos
regulations.
solucionarlo.
So the
Y
first
nos
thing that we
inventamos
decided
esto,
to
identificamos que
do
el
is,
problema era una
well, let's
ausencia de un
identify
instrumento
what is the
que
problem. The problem is
recogiera todo lo
a
que había
lack of an
vigente,
instrument
tanto en
that
el
can
orden nacional como
compile
internacional.
all of the national, international
Imagínense
current
ustedes
standards.
lo
So
que es
imagine
no contar con la
what it
tranquilidad
was
de
like
saber
not to have the peace of mind
cómo
of
hago yo una
knowing
regulación, por
that
dónde
if you wanted to
empiezo,
create a
cojo una
regulation,
hoja
there
en
were
blanco y
steps to
qué
follow.
digo,
You were faced
se
with a
empieza
blank
con qué, con la
slate,
parte
and you would
dispositiva, se empieza
wonder,
con
where shall we
idea.
start? With medical devices or
Entonces,
with this or
eso
that?
fue lo
It
que
was
teníamos que
very
solucionar.
confusing. So that's something that we had to
¿Qué
figure out to
implicaba?
begin
Que
with.
habíamos
What were
identificado
the implications?
unos
Well,
riesgos.
we
Sí
had
teníamos unos
identified risks.
antecedentes que nos
We
decían hay
did have
problemas,
some background
pero esos
information that
problemas
informed us
en
about the
qué se
problems, but the
convertían si
problems, what were they
manteníamos esa
transformed
situación.
into if we kept the
Pues nos
situation
dimos cuenta que
in
la
a
más
business as
importante era
usual
una
approach? We
inseguridad
realized that
jurídica
the most important
porque
thing
las
was that there was
personas
legal
no sabían
uncertainty
a qué
because people
acudir,
didn't
cómo
know
expedir un acto.
who to talk to
Los consultores, los
promote
negociadores,
regulation,
las
the
personas que querían
consultants, the
importar
regulators, the
un
negotiators, people who
medicamento, que
wanted to
querían
import
importar un insumo,
a
no sabían
medicine
a
or
dónde
an
acudir.
input. They didn't know
¿Cuál
who to
era el
talk to.
paso a paso? ¿Cómo hacerlo? ¿En qué
What
tiempo?
was the step-by-step
Eso
approach,
también
the
traía como
deadlines?
riesgo el que había que
And so there
se
was a
había
risk.
obviado la observancia y el
had
cumplimiento de algunas
not
normas. Es increíble.
certain
Hacer este
standards because
reconocimiento es
we
un
didn't
poco
know them.
vergonzoso,
So
pero
it's embarrassing for us to
a
acknowledge
veces se
that was the
pasaban unas
situation,
normas
but
sin
it is
cumplir,
what it is.
no
Sometimes
por mala
people
fe,
would
sino porque quien
import
estaba preparando la
medication
regulación no lo
without
conocía
being in
y no
compliance, and
sabía
it was
dónde
not
estaba esa
because of ill
regulación
will,
y qué había
it
que
was
hacer.
just ignorance
Entonces
of
eso también
what was
pasaba
required.
y
So this is
una
something
vez
that we
expedida la
faced a
norma,
lot. So
era
after the
posible que
creation
terminara
of the
demandada
standard,
y tuviéramos
maybe
que correr
people would
riesgos
have
litigiosos,
to run the risk of
incluso
receiving
porque
a
una norma
lawsuit,
fuera declarada
or
nula
if the
o
standard
haber
was
sido anulada
cancelled, declared null,
efectivamente porque no se cumplieron con todos los
because there
requisitos,
were no
lo cual realmente es una
compliance
cosa
of the
que
requirements,
nunca
which
debería ocurrir.
is something that
También
shouldn't
nos
have happened in the
demostró que
first
teníamos
place.
una falta de
But it is a
planeación
way
por
in
parte
which
de
we
las áreas
realized that there was
involucradas
not correct
porque nunca se
planning,
tomaban el
because
tiempo
we
para
never took
prever
the
qué
time,
era lo que
people never
tenían que
took the
hacer,
time
cómo
to
y
think
qué
about
tiempo
what needed to
requería
be
eso
done
para
and the
llegar a la
times that were
expedición del
required
acto.
to do so, to
Todo eso,
issue
siguiente
this
por favor,
requirement. Next one, please.
nos queda un poco
Therefore,
superado con este procedimiento que
with this new
nosotros
procedure,
hemos
we now
construido y que
feel
les
the
estamos
confidence,
presentando
the instrument
con
that
el
we created and
propósito
we're
y el
presenting here.
ánimo de que
The purpose of
ustedes
it
se
was
enamoren un
so
poco
that people
de
could
este
fall in love
tema,
a little bit of
se lo
this
apropien para cada uno de
subject and
sus
could
países
take
y se
ownership,
den cuenta
and people could
que
in
con
different
con una
countries be
inversión
inspired and realize
pequeña
that
en
with
tiempo,
a small time
acudiendo a las
investment
personas que conozcan más
and
de
by
estos
talking
temas,
to the right
se puede
people,
hacer un
you
ejercicio
can
muy
make a
interesante
big
que
difference.
puede
You
resultar
can have an
útil,
exercise that can be
empezando
very useful.
en un punto, en un piloto que puede
We
convertirse
started with a
realmente y
pilot, which
fácilmente
little by little was
en un
transformed in a very
documento
easy way. It was
aplicable a
transformed
cualquier
into
país,
a
en cualquier
document that
lugar,
is
en cualquier
applicable
momento, para
anywhere,
cualquier tema.
anytime, for any subject.
Entonces, ¿qué fue lo que hicimos? Este es el
So
procedimiento.
what
El
did we
procedimiento
do?
tiene un
This was the
alcance,
procedure.
un
The
objetivo, un
procedure had
alcance
a
y un ámbito de
scope,
aplicación.
an
Para
objective,
nuestro
and a
caso,
sphere of
es
action. And in our
aplicable a
case,
todos los
it
actores
was
del sistema
applicable
de
to
salud
all of the
de
actors in
Colombia.
the health
Y
sector
ese
in
es un mundo ya
Colombia.
bien grande
And
porque
this
involucra
is a
desde
very
el
large
ciudadano
universe
común y
because it
corriente
involves the
hasta
regular citizen as
los
well as
prestadores de
the
servicios de salud, las
people
entidades
who
de
renders
gobierno, las
health
entidades
services,
territoriales y todo.
governmental authorities, land
Lo que
authorities, and
hicimos fue
others. So
construir el
we
procedimiento
created
desde la primera
a
parte,
procedure starting
donde
from the first
efectivamente
stage in
planeamos
which
la norma,
we did the planning of the standard,
hasta la
all the way
expedición de la
down
norma
to
con el
how
cumplimiento
it
de
was
todos los
issued
requisitos,
in compliance
incluyendo
with all
los
of the
pasos,
requirements,
incluyendo
including
los
the different
plazos,
steps, including the
incluyendo
terms,
cuál es
including
la norma, tanto
what the
nacional como
standard would be about at
internacional,
the national
que
and
está
at the
facultando
international
o que
level,
tiene que
so
consultar o que
that
tiene que tener en cuenta.
people could
Entonces, como les decimos,
take this
vamos
into
desde una
consideration.
agenda
So we
regulatoria, que es la
started
primera
from a
etapa,
regulatory
después un
agenda,
análisis
which was the
ex ante,
first stage, then
la
it did
regulación
an
en
ex
sí
ante
misma
analysis,
y el
the
análisis ex
regulation
post.
was drafted, and then there
Todo
was an ex
esto
post analysis. All of
atravesado
this
o
was
de
done
forma transversal está planteado por la
considering
participación ciudadana.
the participation of
Fundamental la
citizens all the
participación
way
de
through.
gremios, de grupos
It
de
was important to
interés,
listen
de
to the guild,
ciudadanos,
the interest
que en
groups,
todas las
the
etapas del
citizens,
proceso
so
pueden
that
en
at
diferentes
every
momentos
stage of the process, people could
intervenir
provide
con sus
feedback,
preguntas, con
could
sus
ask
objeciones,
questions,
con
could
sus
present
comentarios, con sus
objections,
propuestas de mejora,
or perhaps
que
come up with a
solamente
proposals of
enriquecen
an
el
improvement.
acto
And this is a
administrativo que
way in
finalmente va
which
a ser expedido.
everything was enriched
Siguiente.
in the end. Next one, please.
Entonces, en resumen, ¿qué podemos decir?
So
¿Cuáles
to
son
wrap it
las
up,
características
what
que
are
tiene
the
este procedimiento?
features
Y
of
es que
this
aparte de las
procedure?
etapas que les acabo de
Aside
contar,
from the different
forma
stages
parte
that
del
were
sistema de
created,
gestión de la
it is
calidad.
now part
¿Y eso
of the
qué quiere
quality
decir?
management
Está
system.
integrado
What
a
does
las
that mean?
normas
It
técnicas
means
del
that it
Ministerio de
is
Salud,
incorporated in the
en
technical
las cuales
standards
en
of the
ese
Ministry of Health,
conjunto de
and through
técnica
this
y
body of
de
techniques
instrumentos de
and
mejora
tools
para los
of continuous
procesos internos,
improvement,
es decir,
internal
es
processes are
objeto
benefited.
de
The
revisión, es
subject
objeto
of
de
the review
auditorías y
is
hay un
also
control de
audited,
calidad sobre
and
cada
there's
uno de
a
los
quality
procedimientos que
control
están
over each
allí
one of the
avalados,
procedures that take place,
autorizados.
which are
Entonces,
approved.
este procedimiento del que les
And
estoy
so
hablando
this
para la
procedure I
expedición de
am
actos
referring to
administrativos
for
ya forma
creating a
parte del
standard
sistema de
is now
gestión de
a
calidad
part
del
of
Ministerio
the
de Salud.
quality
Es un
system
procedimiento
of the Ministry of Health. It
debidamente
is a
conocido y es
process that's been
objeto de
duly
auditoría y de
acknowledged,
evaluación.
it is audited, and it is assessed.
Adicionalmente, ¿qué más
Additionally,
pudimos nosotros identificar como
another thing
características
we were
relevantes del
able to
proceso?
identify as a relevant
Incluye
feature
la
of the
observancia
process
de
is that it
obligaciones
includes the
internacionales
observance
que
of
tiene
international
suscrito Colombia y que
obligations
aplican al
that
sector salud.
Colombia has undersigned
Eso
for the health
porque,
sector.
como les contaba antes,
Because as
en
I was
algunas
telling you
ocasiones
before,
podríamos
in
habernos estado
certain
saltando
cases,
normas,
we could have been
no
not
haberlas tenido en
being in
cuenta, y
compliance. We were
entonces
skipping
este
standards,
procedimiento nos tiene
but
ya
no
las
more.
alarmas que nos
The
dice en
procedure can
materia de
trigger
salud no se le
alarms
olvide
to
que
let
debe
us
tener
know in
en
terms of
cuenta
health, don't forget
hacer
that
una
you need to
notificación
consider
internacional en estos casos,
notify
recibir
these
las
international
observaciones
authorities, you need to
internacionales, tiene que
receive
usted después de que
comments
escribió el
from
acto también
abroad,
volverlos a notificar
you
y
also
contarles
need
del acto,
to
y en fin, todas las
ratify,
normas
study, and
internacionales que en
notify
materia de
people.
salud
So
podrían
everything
resultar
that
de
in terms of
utilidad. Ahí están
international health
recogidas
matters are important,
como
they
un
are
llamado
being
para
now
que se tenga en
reflected
cuenta durante el
so that we
proceso de
now
expedición del
consider
acto.
them when we
También
are working
tenemos
on
que
the matter.
incorpora
And now
las
we're also
recomendaciones en materia
having
de
the
convergencia regulatoria que hace la
regulatory
OMS.
convergence recommendations of the
Eso,
WHO
por
included.
último, hizo que el instrumento
Finally,
se hiciera de una
thanks to all
manera
of that, the
colaborativa
instrument has
desde el
been
insumo
created
del
in a very
proyecto de
collaborative
convergencia
way
regulatoria
ever
para
since the
dispositivos
beginning,
médicos
is working for medical
hasta
devices in
la
that case, all
participación
the
de
way
las
down to the
entidades que a nivel
participation
nacional
of the
se ven
entities
involucradas
that
en
at the
estos temas en
national
Colombia.
level are
¿Esto qué es?
involved.
El Departamento Administrativo de
The
la Función Pública
Public
es
Function
una de las
Managerial Department,
instituciones con
which
las que
one of the
compartimos este
institutions
proceso.
with whom which
También lo
share the
hicimos con el
process. We
Departamento
also
Nacional de
work with the
Planeación
National
y el
Department of
Ministerio de
Planning
Comercio.
and the Ministry of
¿Por
Trade.
qué? Porque cada una de estas
Why?
entidades
Well, because each
lidera
one of
o
those
bien la regulación
agencies
normativa
are
o
leaders
bien
of
la regulación
regulatory
en materia de
matters,
reglamentos
or
técnicos
they also
o
create
todo
technical
lo que tiene
standards,
que ver con la
or
producción
everything has to
normativa.
do
Ellos
with
eran los llamados a
regulatory
conocer el proceso
production. That is
y que
why
nos
they
dieran el
were
aval, nos
called
dieran el ok
upon so
para
that
decir,
they could
van por buen
supervise and
camino,
approve
tienen todo lo
the
que debe
things that
tener
we
el
were
proceso,
working on,
no
and
se han
they would
saltado
verify
ningún
that
paso,
we
no
were
hace
not
falta
skipping
nada
any
más,
step and that
pueden
nothing else was missing,
implementar.
and that through this we were able to
Como les
implement
decía,
things.
con el apoyo de USAID,
So with the
liderado por
support
Susan,
of USA,
lo que hicimos fue
guided by
construir el
Susan, what we
esqueleto,
did is that we
armarlo,
created a
llamar
backbone.
después a estas entidades,
And
pedirles
later
que lo
we called upon
revisaran,
the
que nos
agencies,
dieran
asked
sus
for
opiniones,
their
que nos dijeran qué
consent
podíamos
and
mejorar
opinions
y
and
finalmente
feedback and
construimos
suggestions for
el
improvement.
proceso,
And
el
that's how the
procedimiento.
process was
Siguiente, por
created.
favor.
Next slide.
¿Qué trajo esto como beneficio?
What did we gain?
Rápidamente nos
Well, the
dimos cuenta
benefits include the
que al
following. Quickly, we
implementarlo
realized that
ganábamos en
when
seguridad
we
jurídica,
implemented this, we
porque ya
created more
todos
legal
los
certainty
actores,
because now
todos
all of
los
the
operadores
stakeholders,
técnicos
all
que
of the
tuvieran la
technical
necesidad de
operators
expedir un
who
acto
had the need
administrativo
of
tenían la
issuing a standard,
certeza de que en
they
ese
had the
procedimiento estaba
certainty
incluida
that
toda la
they had already
información
considered all
jurídica
of the
y
legal
técnica que
information,
requerían
all the
saber
technical
para la
requirements
expedición de un
that
acto
ought to be
administrativo.
included for
También
such an
logramos
action.
tener
And
los
we are
antecedentes
also able to
administrativos
provide
reunidos en un solo lugar,
background information
porque esto no
gathered in a
solo
single
ayuda desde cómo
repository. And
proyectar
this
el
is a
acto y
way in
cómo
which we
planearlo,
can plan
sino que
correctly,
también nos
visualize
permite
correctly
contar
what the
con
standard should
todos
be
los
about. And we are also
¿Usted
having all
realmente
of the
armó un
previous
árbol de
information
problemas? Por
in
favor,
the past. Did you create
entrégame el
a
documento
problem
para contar
tree?
con él como un
Please show the
antecedente.
document
Usted
so that we can
publicó ese
provide
proyecto de acto,
background
lo
information.
puso en
Did you
conocimiento de la ciudadanía.
communicate this
Por
to others?
favor,
Did you
deme el
inform
soporte
citizens
que
about this?
me
Provide
permita tener
evidence
toda esa
so that
información,
we can have all
que
of
si
that
fuera
information as a
necesario y vía
backup. And in case
litigiosa
it
o
is necessary in
simplemente
case of a
como
lawsuit
parte del
or
procedimiento
just
de
as a
saber
part
cómo se expidió
of
esa norma,
a
ya
process of
contamos con
understanding
todo.
how standards are created, now
Igualmente
the
hubo una
information is
priorización
clearly
en temas
stated.
que salieron
We
a la
also
luz, temas que
prioritize
el sistema
matters,
de salud no había
something that the
evidenciado
health
o no había
sector
querido
didn't do
afrontar
before
porque le parecía muy complicado la
because
expedición de la normativa,
it
y
seemed very
ahora esto les
complex. But
facilita
now there's also
abordar
more
los temas
clarity
complejos.
there. We can approach complex
También logramos
subjects in a
que los
step-by-step
actores, al
approach.
estar
It
publicado
is being fragmented into
este
chunks. And
procedimiento
now that
en la
this
página web del
process has been
ministerio,
published
pudiera estar
on the
al
website
alcance
of
de
the
todos los
ministry, it
actores
is
que
available
pueden
to all
incluso levantar la mano y
stakeholders.
decir, oye, te
And
saltaste un
people can
paso,
also say,
o oh, qué bien,
listen, I listened to
esto
your
no lo
website
habíamos
and
conocido y
this
ahora
is something
sabemos que
that
se
we
hace
didn't know of, you might be missing this and that. And so there's a continuous feedback cycle. It is important important to listen to
que nos
citizens, and it's
planteen sus
important for them to have an
problemas, sus
active
propuestas,
participation
sus
so that they speak
comentarios,
about their
pues
concerns,
esto ha
their
logrado que la
proposals,
gente tenga una
and
participación
they
de
feel
una
more
forma mucho
empowered,
más visible.
and it is done
Y
in a
por
more visible,
último,
transparent way.
este
Finally,
procedimiento nos resultó
the
tan útil
procedure was
que
so useful that
va a ser utilizado como
it is
modelo
going to be
a nivel
used as a
nacional y
model at the
territorial,
national
de manera que las
level,
entidades
a
lo
regional level,
adapten a sus
so that the
necesidades
entities can
sin
adapt it
abandonar
to
el
their needs
procedimiento en sí
without
mismo,
abandoning
para que nos
the
pueda permitir
process,
que todo el
so
Estado
that we
funcione
can
bajo la
have
misma lógica,
all the state working
pero
under the
que
same
por
rules,
supuesto lo
same
adapte a sus
logic,
particularidades.
with
Siguiente.
certain adjustments to these specific needs of each place.
Como les contaba, ha resultado tan exitoso, ha
It has been so
resultado tan
successful,
beneficioso este
it has been so
procedimiento, que
beneficial
participamos en
that
un
now we have
concurso que hizo el
participated
Departamento Nacional de Planeación de
in a
Colombia
program of
y
the
ganamos
National
el premio.
Planning Department,
Fue
and we won the
el
first
único
prize.
procedimiento que se
It was
presentó
the only
y
procedure that
ganamos
was presented, and we
mostrando con la
won.
sencillez,
We won by
sencillez
showing
por
the
lo práctico,
simplicity.
pero
I mean,
complejidad de toda
simplicity
la
because it was very
cantidad de
practical,
información que trae,
while
de
being very
paso a
complex in
paso,
terms of
de
the
poder
information it contained. It was a
involucrar a
step-by-step
cualquier
approach, and
persona,
the way in
una
which
persona
anybody
que
could
llega
be
nueva a esta
involved,
materia como la
people
persona más
who
versada,
are
que puede
newcomers
entrar a
and people
reconocer
who have a lot of
signos de
experience.
alerta,
Anybody
quién
could
debe revisar
be aware
esto,
of who has
en
to
qué
see
plazo lo
what are
hace,
the
qué no tiene que
things to pay
hacer,
attention
qué es
to, what are the
obligatorio.
triggers of an
Bueno, pues
alarm,
nos
what is
hicieron este
compulsory, what is not.
reconocimiento del
And
cual
so
estamos
that's
muy
why we were given
orgullosos.
this acknowledgement. We feel very proud of that.
Y eso hace que pueda ser implementado, como les decía, por las
As I
entidades
said,
territoriales y por las entidades del
all
orden
people
nacional.
in the country
Siguiente.
of all governmental levels can now implement it in an easy way. Next one.
Y no podría estar completo este proceso
But
después
the
de haber
process
terminado
couldn't
el
have been
procedimiento, que fue lo que
completed
decidimos, hacer un
after
entrenamiento.
everything we did
Porque
if we
el
didn't have a
operador
training,
técnico, el área
because
técnica,
technical
tiene que
operators
apropiarse de él, tiene que
require
conocerlo.
to take
Así que
ownership.
quisimos
They need to get
entrar en los meses de
familiarized.
marzo y
And that
abril
is why on
a
March and
ofrecer
April,
esa
we have
capacitación
been providing
y
training
resultó
classes,
muy beneficiosa.
which
Tuvimos más o
have been
menos en
very
promedio una
beneficial.
participación de
We
120
trained around
personas,
120
funcionarios del
people,
Ministerio de Salud,
public officials from the
interesados en
Ministry of
conocer
Health,
cómo se
and people
abordaba la
who were
expedición de
interested
actos
in learning
administrativos.
how the
Y durante
regulations
estas 4 o
and the
5 sesiones
standards
nos
now would be
acompañaron,
approached. And
entramos
so they
en la
accompanied
minucia,
us.
en el detalle,
We
y
went into a
resultó
great discussion of the
que esa
details,
es una
and it
segunda
turns
parte de ese
out
procedimiento,
that we now
al
are
tal
going to start
punto
with the second
que va
stage
a
of the
ser
procedure.
incluido dentro de una
During the next
capacitación
stage,
obligatoria para todas las
we will
personas
have a
que
compulsory
ingresen al
training for all
ministerio como nuevos
officials who
funcionarios.
are hired
Entonces,
as
¿qué
new
tenemos
officials
hasta ahora?
at the ministry level. So what
Podemos
have we
decir
done so far?
rápidamente que nos
To
apropiamos de la
summarize
política
it,
de mejora
we have
normativa. Al
taken
apropiarnos de
ownership
ella,
of the
encontramos
policies
dónde estaban
for
nuestras dificultades,
regulatory
cómo
improvement and standard
podíamos
creation.
nosotros llegar a solucionar
We
alguna parte de ese
realized
problema,
where we
y fue
had
con la
problems, we
expedición
came
del
up with
procedimiento
solutions,
de
and
expedición de actos
that's how we
administrativos.
created the
Luego
document I
entonces esto
referred
nos
to.
llenó
And
de
because of this,
energía, de
we
ganas, de
have
buena
been
vibra para
re-energized
llegar y
so as to
participar
be
en el
able
concurso de buenas
to
prácticas
participate in
regulatorias
the Good
y
Regulatory
finalmente
Practices
pasar al
contest.
entrenamiento
And
de todos los
then we went
actores
into the training of all
relevantes
the
del Ministerio de Salud.
stakeholders of the
Siguiente.
Ministry of Health. Next one, please.
Ahora entonces planteémonos cuál es el reto, porque
So
no
what is the
queremos
challenge
quedarnos
ahead?
solamente
Because
con
we
esto.
don't want
Entonces, a
to
futuro, ¿qué es lo que queremos?
be in a
Es
comfort
pedir una
zone about this.
resolución que
In the
recoja el
future, we wish to
procedimiento
have a
ya de forma
resolution
de acto
so
administrativo,
that
contando
the
todos
whole
estos
effort can
pasos.
be
Vamos a continuar con las
formalized
capacitaciones, como les
at
estaba
all
diciendo,
levels. And as I
para
mentioned,
que
we
cada
will
persona
continue
que
with the
llegue se lo
trainings
apropie, lo
so that
conozca, lo
people
tenga
can
como una
get to
herramienta
know
de
and
primera
use
necesidad.
this as a first
Y
need
vamos a
tool.
mantener actualizado el
And we
procedimiento.
will
Es
keep the procedure
indispensable con esta
updated. That
sociedad
is
que evoluciona tan
essential
rápidamente
because
que tengamos el
things change so
procedimiento siempre
quickly in this
actualizado.
modern society that
Todo
is
eso en don de
of the
redonda
utmost
y para
importance
qué?
for us to
Para
keep things
lograr
updated
elevar el
constantly.
nivel de
And with this, we
apropiación
will
por
be
parte
able
de los
to
equipos técnicos
have more
de las buenas
ownership of
prácticas
the technical
regulatorias en armonía con
teams
los
on
estándares
regulatory
nacionales
practices
e internacionales.
in a
Así
standardized
que mi
ways with
invitación,
international
reitero, para finalizar esta charla,
ideas.
es
So to conclude,
anímense a
I would like to encourage
países
everyone, if you have a
implementar
situation like
una
the one
forma de
we had,
procedimiento como esta que
why
nos
don't you
permita
try this?
estandarizar
Because
cómo se
you are able
escriben
to
los actos
standardize the
administrativos.
way in
Van a
which
ver que ganan
standards
en
are
tiempo,
created.
en
You
experiencia,
will gain so
y
much
van a tener a
experience,
muchas
free
personas
time, and you have
con
so many
trabajos más
people
sencillos por hacer.
with
Muchas
simple
gracias.
jobs. So it's totally worth the effort. Thank you, everyone.
Well, we really want to thank Marta for having taken the time to pre-record her message. We are really very enthusiastic about the work that was developed by the Ministry of Health in close collaboration with the National Planning Department, and the intentions for that to become kind of like the standard procedure for the regulatory agencies in a horizontal approach with Colombia. So we do not have questions right now. Susan is here with us, and we would like to offer, in benefit of the time, to post your questions in the Q&A feature. May Susan respond to them in writing. And of course, if there is any other question that you would like to ask and get into further discussions, you can always forward those to us via email. So thank you very much. And then without further ado, and with our apologies for these few minutes starting late, I'd like to welcome Janet Tronzo, Senior Executive Vice President of AdvaMed, who is leading the Technology and Regulatory Department that also serves as the chair of the Global Medical Technology Alliance Regulatory Committee. Janet, really thank you very much for taking the time to share with us the work that GMTA has done while developing the position of the Alliance in regards of reliance. So without further ado, Janet, the floor is yours. Thank you. And we will start sharing your slides. Just give us a second, please. So there they are. Your microphone is closed.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I just can't hear anyone else.
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay, well, thank you very much for allowing me to present on the Global Medical Technology Alliance recently published white paper. Unfortunately, I'm assuming you can hear me, but I could not hear Sandra. So I will continue, but I'm not sure I'll be able to do a Q&A because of this default issue for me. Can you go to the next slide? So I want to give you a little bit of background about why we developed this paper and talk a little bit about the foundational principles and then the 10 core tenets that comprise the paper, and then a few things about next steps. But maybe I should remind everybody that the Global Medical Technology Alliance is an alliance of many medical device trade associations around the world, trade associations in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Canada, the US, are just a few examples of those associations that comprise GMTA. GMTA also has a regulatory committee that was instrumental in developing this paper. And we have been working on it for some time. It was really in response to update a global regulatory convergence paper that GMTA had done 2018, I believe. So the reason why we're looking at this concept of reliance is because we believe that reliance is a key component of achieving regulatory convergence. Regulators around the world have, there are challenges having the sufficient resources to regulate every detail. And so the opportunity for reliance it will be a key component to achieve the goal of regulatory convergence. Regulators and the manufacturers are all committed to the timely access for patients to safe, effective, and quality medical devices. When you have small differences, even in guidance or in the regulations or the standards, then those differences impact the regulatory pathway. And one example that we give here is the fact that if you classify a device into a different classification within two different regulatory systems, the regulatory requirements are to be commensurate with the classification of the device type. And once you start changing classifications, this is just one way where these small differences can mean a major difference in how that product gets to market and how quickly it gets into the hands of patients if you have these multiple approaches. So we discovered that during the COVID pandemic, these differences became very apparent because we were looking at ways in which we could get these emergency use products into the hands of the testing labs, into the hands of hospitals and patients for protective equipment, hospitals with ventilators and laboratories conducting COVID-19 diagnostic tests. Getting those products through the regulatory system was in a much more expedited manner than under normal conditions was a very important way to address the pandemic. And that's why we saw those differences being very real. And so it was important to look at it from that perspective. May I have the next slide? So our foundational principles are essentially that convergent regulatory frameworks around the world, if we're going to implement them, they have to be based on internationally recognized best practices and standards. I think this is a theme you've probably heard many times. We believe that to implement these convergent regulatory frameworks, it's very important to have a regulatory reliance component to that, including recognition. I mean, we talk about reliance whereby one regulator can rely in whole or just in part to another regulator's decision. But there also could be that component of recognition of other regulators' decisions to incorporate that into your regulatory decision-making process. We saw that occur during COVID pandemic, where in the U.S. There was a need for ventilators, and if a manufacturer had a CE mark for that ventilator and they filed an emergency use authorization in the US FDA system, that was considered in their determination to expedite that approval. And then finally, the foundational principles include the implementation of core tenets of medical device regulation. And this is really the meat of this paper. So let's go to the next slide. So the first one is to ensure predictability and to have adequate resources. The purpose of this recommendation is that predictability is so important in any regulatory system for medical devices. And that means timelines for decision-making. And also, in addition to having sufficient time or adequate timelines for the various types of submission types, that makes it predictable where the manufacturer can have a sense of when a decision may be made. And then the regulator needs to have a regulatory system that has the sufficient resources. So it works such that the resources have to be commensurate with the regulatory system you have in place. If you do not have resources to hire, 2,000 reviewers, then you have to think about other ways in which you can achieve your regulatory authorities by relying on practicing some of these principles. The second one is the support of innovation and the application of equal regulations for both domestic and international companies. This principle is based on the application of the same regulatory requirements for any company, no matter whether they're a domestic company or an international company. The idea of having different regulatory requirements is not supportive of these principles of reliance. The adoption of good regulatory practices, you've heard about this many times. Good regulatory practices are intended to ensure predictability and transparency and access to technology in a timely manner. And the adoption of these good regulatory practices is really essential for promoting these concepts. And then the fourth one on this slide is about the requirements that a regulator imposes on a manufacturer should be appropriate for the risk associated with that device type. Having additional requirements that do not in any way have a patient safety benefit, but they're just additional requirements imposed on the manufacturer is not supportive of the theme of good reliance principles. And also in this category of avoiding requirements or redundancies in requirements is to avoid the periodic re-registration of products. And this is one where there are some requirements for re-registration, and it is on a periodic basis, which is redundant in our views and could be unnecessary. The next slide. The first bullet here about accepting global clinical trial data and leveraging real-world evidence. Many years ago, there was an effort to have a global clinical trial. There were two regulators that were working together with a research institute in the US. It was Japan and the US, and they were working towards a global clinical trial. But the key to getting a global clinical trial is that the data have to be collected under good clinical practices. And there is an ISO standard for that approach, which is 14155. And working through the good clinical practices and ensuring that data are collected under the terms of that standard means that data are good data, and they could be used and leveraged in regulatory decision-making from one jurisdiction to another. And also, we've had a lot of discussion over the last several years, 5 years or so about leveraging real world evidence. We have talked about this at the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. The idea of being able to use real world evidence to support a regulatory decision. And it could be partially based on real world evidence, but if the real world evidence is good quality data, there should be no objection to including it in a regulatory program. The next bullet is about the implementation of a risk-based approach to product changes. Not every change to a medical device should result in the requirement for a new submission with another regulatory review. Some changes are considered minor. Some changes are considered ones that have an impact on a significant impact on the device, and therefore may need to see a regulatory review and a new submission. But the important factor here is the implementation of a risk-based approach. How much of a change is that? Are the changes small enough that and not impacting the device, and they could be just validated through the company's quality management system, but requiring a regulatory new submission for every change is not supportive of a risk-based approach, and that is a key component of our core tenets here. The next one on this list is to avoid the country of origin requirements. It becomes an unnecessary barrier if a country requires that the company that originates in another country has to have that same product approved in that country. Sometimes there are different products made for different populations in other countries. So this could become a unnecessary barrier to getting medical technology into the hands of patients and healthcare providers. Next slide. The implementation of a single dossier. This is something that the International Medical Device Regulators Forum has really begun the idea of an international approach with the medical device single audit program. And we know that that program has been around now for several years and has been successful. And now this idea is the idea of a dossier that would serve as a regulatory submission to multiple regulators. Now, under IACRC, there's currently a consultation going on the table of contents. And that's kind of a first step, is the table of contents document. If there could be that's a starting place for the opportunity for a single dossier, but it's really a key component of trying to achieve regulatory reliance. If there is a single dossier that regulators can rely on, they all require the same data requirements and components to the submission, there could be a real opportunity here. The next one is the adoption of electronic instructions for use. In a world where there is electronic means of communication of any kind of information, the instructions for use in an electronic format rather than a paper format is really something that needs to be moved in that direction. Instructions for use for a medical device, depending upon the complexity of that medical device, could be hundreds of pages of printed material. Why in the world would we want to do that when you can have an electronic version that you can go to quickly to the section you're looking for? This is something that is a real important way of the future from our perspective. And then the last recommendation here is about the acceptance of digital labels. And this is particularly helpful if in cases where you have a label that has multiple languages on that label, and there's not a whole lot of room or space on a physical label to allow for all of those multiple languages. So having the digital barcode or QR code to look at, to scan, then you can scroll to the language that you are seeking for understanding the label. So these are our 10 core recommendations. Let me go to the next slide. And our goal from the GMTA perspective is to communicate these principles and recommendations in international setting, like the one today. We also presented these principles at the end of March at the IACRC meeting on their stakeholder day. It was the topic for the GMTA presentation. There is another opportunity later this month where we will be discussing these principles at the MedTech Forum in Dublin. And we will continue to promote them in any way in which we can, in any way in which people will listen to us. The GMTA Reliance paper has been posted on the GMTA website for anyone to use, read at your. There are many more words than the ones that are on these slides. I just wanted to give you a quick preview. And then if we can leverage these in partnership with other global regulators, we will continue to work on those. We're just in the beginning stages of the promotion of our Reliance principles. And I hope I could take questions, but I can't hear anybody. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Janet, thank you very much, and our apologies for the technical difficulties. I know you cannot hear us.
I know there are some questions in the chat, but I think they're in English, so sorry.
So our apologies to Janet, she cannot hear us, but we are really very appreciative to having her here, and we will be forwarding the questions. May we provide answers not only to the question, but also to the comments. And as part of the efforts of GMTA to promote the utilization of this white paper, as Coalition, we're going to be making it available in Portuguese and Spanish, and we will be sharing that with all of you. So we may use it during your conversations with regulators and utilize it as a base to drive those conversations and support the regulators in their initiatives, in their efforts towards the implementation of Reliance. So we're having more and more elements, more and more tools to help to contribute for Reliance to become a reality in our region and of course globally. So we will let you know as soon as we have the white paper available in also Portuguese and Spanish. We will be uploading that to the coalition website where you will you will have access to it. So really, thank you very much to Janet and GMTA for this effort. And without additional comments, I'd like to pass the floor to Patty Wu for our last presentation this afternoon for some of us. Patty Wu is Vice President and Managing Director at C&M International LLC. She's also Chair of the Americas Business Dialogue Health Working Group, and she leads the efforts on regulatory convergence in many fronts, including the latest initiative, which was born at the Summit of the Americas last June and now is a reality. That is America's Rise for Health. Patty, really welcome to our session, and thank you very much for making the time to share this initiative with our attendees today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you for having me. It's great to be with everybody. We are very excited to share with you the latest updates on America's Rise for Health. So as Sandra said, I chair the America's Business Dialogue Health Working Group. For those of you who are not familiar with the America's Business Dialogue, it is an organization that is that's housed in the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, or BID for our Spanish speakers. And it's very much private sector driven. It has several working groups. And about some years ago, we, a number of us worked to establish a working group dedicated to health because surprisingly, that was one of the working groups that was missing. Several of you may already be members. If you are not, you can very simply just request to join. The website is very user-friendly. You can just Google America's Business Dialogue and ask to join. There's no fee to join, and it really is an organization that is dedicated to presenting the collective views of the private sector from across the Western Hemisphere. So encourage you all and your organizations to be active members if you are not already. And again, you can reach out to the ABD Secretariat directly, or if you have any issues, you can contact Stephen or others who can point you in the right direction. But what is really terrific about the America's Business Dialogue is that, again, it's the only, to our knowledge, organization that collectively represents the private sector's views from across the entire Western Hemisphere. And it has a special role in that as part of the Summit of the Americas, which meets every 3 years at the head of state or head of government level, the ABD is really the interlocutor for private sector views that are shared with governments as part of the Summit of the Americas process, which is managed by the Organization of American States. And so when the United States hosted the Summit of the Americas last June in Los Angeles, we collectively worked with several of you to develop a suite of recommendations. And those, again, can be found on the ABD website. But first and foremost, our recommendation was that, we can constantly be developing our recommendations, whether that's on regulatory convergence, sufficient healthcare financing, et cetera. But unless we had a regular mechanism, a regular platform to really consistently and deeply engage with governments from across the region, then we felt that our recommendations, were kind of not perhaps being as effectively discussed and implemented as they could be. And we certainly saw that in other parts of the world, there are these types of annual mechanisms. APEC, for example, that several of you may be familiar with, has an annual high-level meeting on health and the economy that brings ministers of health industry, academia, and others together to really work on these issues. And we felt that our observation is that when you have that annual cadence, when you have that regular cadence, we're really able to make much more progress, right? We're able to build on previous years' activities. There's a continuity, and that then really provides an important accelerator. And so when the United States hosted last summer, our top recommendation, in addition to all the substantive ones, is that we really need this type of annual mechanism or platform. And we were delighted that the United States Department of Commerce, as well as the United States Department of Health and Human Services, agreed with us and were very willing and happy to champion the effort to establish such an annual mechanism. And so that was announced last summer. And we were thrilled that just a few months later, so in March, we actually launched the first such annual mechanism, which is called America's Rise for Health. We met in Panama City on the margins of the IDB Board of Governors meeting. And we really spent a day with several governments where in the morning, they met as part of a State Department-led mechanism that's called the Economy and Health Dialogue of the Americas, and that's a government-only mechanism. And then in the afternoon, we held our America's Rise for Health. What I'm going to do now is just share my screen with you to show you, to share kind of some of our outcomes. And again, this is all on the web, so you can, it's all there for you to refer back to. This is the ABD website, and then we have a dedicated site for America's Rise for Health. So, again, what are we? What's our mission? It's really to have that annual multi-sectoral forum so we can harness the collective strengths of the region's private sector and civil society and partner with governments on a consistent basis to bring about resilient health ecosystems and economies. This just gives some of the background about how the announcement to create America's Rise for Health was done on the margins of the Summit of the Americas, as I was just explaining. And then this gets into what actually happened in Panama. So we met on March 20th, and we were thrilled that this group here, all these beautiful faces.
Patty,
yeah.
My apologies for interrupting, but we cannot see your screen.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You know what? I always have to click one more button here. Thank you. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, it is.
Great. I always forget you have to click one more button. So anyway, just to back up, you can see the website here. So this is the ABD website, and this is our dedicated America's Rise for Health site. I'll just scroll to the top so you can see it. And this has some of our background. And then I was just showing the photo, and I believe many of you are in it, but together we were really delighted that in partnership with, we had here, let's see, we had participation from, here we go, 11 governments, 25 private sector entities. So of course, AdvaMed, of course, the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence. We had, several of the associations from Chile, Brazil, et cetera. We had civil society, and we also had academia. So we had really a terrific cross sector. And in this group, we also had the IDB, the Pan American Health Organization, and CAF. And together we developed this consensus statement, which really attempted to memorialize the areas of common interest where we would like to focus our efforts. So as you can see here, and I apologize, it's a little small, but we identified kind of 6 key areas. So the first is around resilient supply chains. The second, I think of particular interest to this group, is around accelerating regulatory improvements. And here you can see we really focused on reliance and capacity building for national regulatory authorities and GRPs. Third area is on really sufficient health financing. The fourth is around ethics. And of course, you have your terrific sister coalition, the Inter-American Coalition for Business Ethics, which is a terrific leader in this space. And then the last is really around, I'm sorry, the fifth is around kind of diversity and inclusion and intersectionality. And then the sixth is around digital health solutions. So again, you can read this consensus statement at your leisure. It's all up on the web here. Let me try to go back here. So we developed this consensus statement. We had, really terrific participation. And now we have to get down to business and do the hard work so that we can bring that statement alive with actual collaborative activities to move the needle. And so what we're doing now is, and hopefully this will work, now that we've launched, what we're working to do is two things. One is to populate our steering group. So the steering group will be the governance of America's Rise for Health at the highest level. So really set our agenda, draft our statement, approve our terms of reference. We're thrilled that the U.S. Department of Commerce Undersecretary Marissa Lago has stepped forward to chair that. And I just saw her recently. She said she's incredibly bullish on our efforts here. So we're thrilled to have her. And then we are in the process of recruiting additional governments to serve on that steering group. We just had a terrific call with the new minister or acting minister of health of Costa Rica, Minister Carrillo, and he enthusiastically shared that he will join our steering group. We also had a terrific call with the Dominican Republic with both the health minister and the finance minister. The Dominican Republic will host the next Summit of the Americas, and they are very enthusiastic and are currently determining which minister will join us at the steering group level. And then we have several calls underway with other governments. So we would really like to see a handful of governments step up to join us at that steering group level, and again, really help
Patty,
drive
I don't know if it is only me, but we cannot hear
forward.
you. Oh, okay, we can hear you again.
At the steering group level. And then the other piece that we're working on now is recruiting our pillar workstream leads. So as I shared with you in the statement, we have 6 areas of focus, one which is regulatory, and we're currently in conversations with governments to see which governments would like to chair those work streams. So Costa Rica, for example, Minister Carrillo said that Costa Rica would like to chair or co-chair the digital health pillar work stream. We currently do not yet have a government that has stepped up to chair or co-chair the regulatory work stream. That said, we have calls underway being scheduled now with Mexico, with Chile, and so on. So we will certainly be asking them for them to indicate their interest. But with your group's support, and perhaps as you're speaking with regulatory authorities and ministries of health, it'd be terrific if you could encourage them to join and to take that leadership role. Or we're certainly happy to coordinate with you if you can help. Excuse me, I don't know why this is still calling here. To help us with that recruitment, because of course we would love to see a chair, co-chair for the regulatory pillar work stream. Once we have those, we're hoping that we'll have those kind of by June locked in. We're currently, as I said, we just spoke with Costa Rica and the Dominican Republic. We have calls scheduled with Chile and with Mexico, and others are being scheduled as we speak. But then what we plan to do is, as you can see here, really, pull those groups together. And we've already received from those who participated in Panama, but certainly welcome your participation as well. We have received from several private sector and civil society and academic representatives their interest to support these pillar work streams. So we've been collecting those names as expressions of interest. And once we have a government chair or co-chairs, we will schedule those pillar work streams to come together. And, and I think first and foremost is we have that consensus statement, which will really be our North Star. But then we really need to hear from our government chair, co-chairs, what their appetite is and get their perspective. Panama was terrific, but it was very much, as you can imagine, a half day, much more of a launch kind of overview event. And I think with these pillar work streams, we'll really then need to get into the meat of the issues and what the collaborative opportunities are. So we'll look to do that for the balance of the year, the remainder of the year. And then our current thinking is to hold the second America's Rise for Health around the same time next year. So that would probably be in April, again, around the margins of the IDB Board of Governors meeting. Again, this is all subject to change, but this is the current thinking. And the hope is then by then, we'll have a year's worth of work to report out on. We'll have the consensus statement, but what have we done since then to try to achieve those objectives? So I think that perhaps, let me just stop sharing here. I think, how do I stop sharing? Stop video. No. Let's see if I can, here we go. So I think that perhaps gives you an overview. And of course, Sandra was there in person, Stephen was there in person, and perhaps others of you who I can't see here. So welcome your additions, if there's anything I missed or anything else you'd like me to dive into. But we're very excited, and I think with this platform, we really, again, want to have that annual regular drumbeat and that moment where we can bring public and private together at the ministerial level, at the CEO or senior executive level, where we can really hold ourselves accountable for progress and elevate some of the terrific work that happens at the working levels, but kind of elevate it politically so that we can really position the region to be much more competitive and much more successful in the future. I'll stop there. Over to you, Sandra.
Patty, really, thank you very much. I think it is really very important for us to learn all the different initiatives that are going on out there, all with the same purpose, all with the intention of further advancing convergence as the means, of course, initially, to make sure that patients in our region do have access to the medical technology and the medical supplies that are required to take care of their health, but also as a trigger for economic development, for investments, to promote investments in the region, to promote the creation of quality jobs in the region. And sometimes we can feel kind of like overwhelmed about all these many different initiatives that are going around. Sometimes we feel that probably they are overlapping. And of course, in some instances they are. But what it is really very important for us to put into consideration is that just exactly what you said. There are many things that are going on at an operational level, but it is crucial for them to really become a reality, for them to become stronger, to take a way much more visible role at a political level, at a higher level at higher levels in the government. And we're truly convinced that this initiative is really going to be helping us achieving that goal. That is a crucial need. For things to happen, they have to be at the highest possible level in the agenda of the governments, and they have to understand all the benefits that are coming out of all these complicated regulatory world that they sometimes do not want to deal with. But that is the basis for them to succeed in many other initiatives. So really, we are very, very appreciative of all your work, of all your leadership. And we always are offering our partners in all the initiatives and all the work we do to support our partners, our members in their local initiatives. And of course, for our members in the coalition, we are always attentive. We're always open to help you navigate in all these through all these initiatives, through all these programs, and making sure that you have access to the proper initiatives, to the proper tools that will enable you to do the work at a local level. So you count on us. I'm pretty sure we count on Patty. We count on America's Rise for Health. And so please make sure that we are all here to help and to try to facilitate the work and the navigation through all these many different initiatives. And before we close, and we really are very, very appreciative of your time, Patty. I don't see questions here in the chat box for you, but if we get some, of course, we're going to be forwarding them to you so you can help us support our members into getting a better understanding on the initiative. And of course, we want to invite everybody to save the date this next May 26th, where the next virtual session of the Ibero-American and Caribbean Regulatory Improvement Network meeting is going to happen. So we can, of course, as coalition, we can share all the information for our members to take an active role in that. And with this, we are closing our morning session. Patty, again, thank you very much and congratulations for the outputs that are there right now in such a short period of time. Of course, this seems to be easy, but we know that this is the result of many, many years of work that finally came into this reality.
Oh, well, thank you, Sandra. That means a lot. And again, we know it wouldn't be possible without so many of you and your continued support, and we will count on it going forward. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all our participants in this session, and see you like in an hour and a half for the coalition internal session. Thank you.